Thank you, Professor Nagler, for your kind introduction, and I would like to thank the organizer for the invitation and especially for the honor of participating in this opening session just after Professor Bob Kyle. So I would like to discuss the access to novel agent, and my first slide is very important. It has been presented by many investigators, and especially by Paul Richardson at the last EBMT meeting, and it is adapted from a paper published by Dr. Kumar from the Mayo Clinic. And just to show you the major and I would say dramatic improvement in the prognosis of multiple myeloma started in 2000 and rapidly increasing. The first improvement in the year 1995 to 2000, which was actually related to the use of autologous stem cell transplantation, is younger patients. And the introduction of novel agent was in 2000, and you see here the improvement in 2000 to 2005, and more strikingly from 2005 to 2010. So the first thing I have to say is that novel agents are responsible for a major improvement in patient prognosis and in patient management. So why do we discuss access to drug? Should give these good drugs to everybody. The problem is their price. And the problem is not only their price, but the rapid increase of healthcare spendings in all major countries, as shown on this slide, with the United States in black, but other countries, including European. And it was just until 2008. And I have to say that the situation is getting worse for many reasons. The first is that because of the economic crisis of 2008, the GDP curves are flat in most countries. So the part of healthcare spending compared to the GDP in every country is increasing. And this is due to the challenges that all countries have to face. The first is the increase of life expectancy, which is of course a good thing, but which induces an increase in the number of chronic diseases, disability, and comorbidities, which induce a higher cost of patient management. And the second reason is the increasing cost of innovation. And I have to say that speaking of drugs, after years of stagnation, pharmaceutical research is now extremely productive. Again, it's a good thing for the patient. And in many diseases, I've listed some of them here, virology, especially recently hepatitis C, immunology and inflammation, many orphan genetic diseases, and obviously oncology and hematology. And I have to say, for multiple myeloma, a number of very important discoveries, which are summarized here. 10 new agents have been licensed by FDA in the last 10 years. In yellow, the oldest one, thalidomide, lenalidomide, and bortezomib. And in green, the latest one. In 2015, there were 4 drugs, not less than 4 drugs registered by the FDA. But the price of this new agent is a real concern, and for the first time last year at the ASCO meeting, the American Society for Clinical Oncology, a plenary session was focused on the cost of new anti-cancer agent, and this slide was shown. And you see on this slide that in the 70s, the monthly median cost of cancer drugs was only $10 to $100. And currently in 2010, and even more now, the median monthly cost of cancer drugs is in the range of $10,000. What about myeloma? Here is a slide showing an evaluation of the price of new drugs as published very recently, 2 weeks ago, on the website of an Institute for Clinical and Oncology Review, which is part of the Midwest CPAC, which is a health economic institution. And you see here the price per unit. So if you look at in US dollars, I don't want to focus on one of these drugs, but you have to make the calculation for the cost for one cycle, or the cost for 6 months or 1 year. It's 1 unit, and mean 1 vial for IV drugs or 1 capsule for oral drugs. 1 unit. So to summarize, the price of new anti-cancer drugs in a recent paper was said to range from $120,000 to $160,000 per year. Obviously, this price is not affordable for patients who don't have optimal coverage or in all low-income countries. And this raises the question of equal access for all. This induces a consequence is that there is a production of lower-priced generics in some countries, but we don't know the security, the safety of these lower-priced generics. And finally, this raises concerns regarding sustainability of healthcare systems. And the situation might be even worse in the next few years because we have newer agents. We already have the anti-PD-1, PD-L1, so-called immuno-oncology drugs. We'll already have bispecific monoclonal antibodies, and we will have very soon the CAR T cells, which will probably be very expensive as well. So the consequence of this high cost of new agent is the budget impact. The budget impact of some new drugs is not affordable or very difficult because of high number of patients. The example is sofosbuvir, Sovaldi, for the treatment of hepatitis C 2 years ago, because a large number of patients were to be treated. And currently it's the same for anti-PD-1, PD-L1 for frequent cancer like lung cancer, for instance, or many others to come. Even in rare diseases like hematological malignancies, budget impact can increase progressively due to life prolongation thanks to these drugs. And this is the example of the TKI inhibitor, Gleevec and the following, in chronic myeloid leukemia. Initially, the number of patients was small, but since the drug is, let's say, curing the patient, we have more and more patients every year. Another problem is combination, which may be more active, but which obviously are very expensive. Just an example, not in myeloma, I will discuss an example in myeloma later. In melanoma, metastatic melanoma, the combination of 2 antibodies, anti-PD-1 and ipilimumab, Yervoy, is so expensive, probably almost $300,000 per year. In multiple myeloma, what is the situation? We have more active agents, so we have more possibilities of salvage treatments, which, as I said, does increase the overall survival, does increase the number of patients to be treated. And furthermore, treatments are often prescribed until progression, long-term treatment, continuous treatment, long-term maintenance. Finally, as I said, combination may be more active, and they are more active in relapsed patients triple drug versus lenalidomide, dexamethasone, or bortezomib, dexamethasone, and they also are more active in newly diagnosed patients, and it has been shown that triple combination is superior to double combination. So the consequences at the national level of this high price and high budget impact is that although the drug-related expenses represent only a small part of all healthcare spendings, in France is 15 to 16%, nevertheless, the budget impact of new agent may wipe out efforts made to contain healthcare spendings. Therefore, choices become necessary, and choices may result in cuts, which is rationing. And the example is England, where the national health system decided to stop funding 17 cancer drugs in 25 different indications, including two well-known multiple myeloma agents, lenalidomide and pomalidomide, plus other drugs used in hematological malignancies. So the question is, why is the price of new drugs so high? Obviously, it's not because of the production. Even by specific monoclonal antibodies, it's small part of the final price. They are very expensive, but it's a small part of the final price. More important is the research and development costs. We know that the cost of large randomized studies is extremely high. We know that research is long and at high risk of failure, while life duration of drugs is short because of further improvement, because of generics. We know that from basic research to clinical studies, the cost, the research development cost, may be more than $1 billion. And we accept that high prices are justified if the target is small. Very expensive development, very few patients, so the price per patient can be high, okay. However, the true research development effort remains largely unknown and might include cost of previous failures and also cost of future trial. Not only clinical studies needed for market access, but also all studies which will be performed for clarifying the indication or for addressing new questions. So my personal opinion is that R&D cost should be more transparent. Otherwise, one may think, and for instance in France, media or some doctors may think that high prices are mostly related to shareholders' claim for rapid return on investment. Another possibility for pharmaceutical company, they should be more transparent, but they should also look at less expensive development. And they sometimes would like to have more rapid access, which is good, by changing the way of studying a new drug. This is a current way with phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 prior to license, and after that post-launch randomized trial or post-launch observational studies or registries. And in blue, it's patients who are simply treated without any study. What the pharmaceutical company would like to do is to reduce the number of patients included into trials prior to license. And you see here, phase 1, phase 2, and rapid license just when starting phase 3 with a lower number of randomized patients. That means that more patients should be included into clinical trial after license, what we could call post-launch clinical studies. If they succeed in doing that, the prices should be lower. Another explanation for high prices is that they define the price in conjunction with the health gain compared to existing therapy. But it's not very easy. We don't know what is the primary objective. Should it be, for instance, in myeloma, progression-free survival or overall survival? Significant differences are not always clinically meaningful. And an important question is, what is the objective? Is it an individual objective or a healthcare, public healthcare objective? And the example is sofosbuvir, very expensive, but very active. And it can cure patients and eradicate the virus in patient, in 90% of the patient. So, in the long term, it might contribute to eradicate the disease, so it's a public health objective, or at least to reduce the incidence of the prevalence of hepatitis C. And it's a short-term treatment. So initially, it's a very high budget impact, but at 10 years, it could be a benefit for the society. So it's very difficult to evaluate the health gain. But my feeling is that if the price of a new drug is defined by its clinical added value, why is it identical in all clinical studies or clinical situation or indication, whatever the benefit for the patient? For instance, Avastin, very important interest in one cancer, very marginal interest in the other cancer, but the same price. And the other question is, how can we define the added value in combination? The example in myeloma, if you have Lendex, and if you compare Lendex plus a third agent, if the triple combination is superior, it needs a higher price. But how do you define the price of X? Can it be double of Lendex? Of course. So to conclude for this part, the objective is to define the fair price. We all know that we need benefits of pharmaceutical company, because benefit invested in further research and innovation, benefits is of course used for clinical research, for helping cooperative group to address new questions. It's also very important to education, and these countries in Congress might not exist without the pharmaceutical companies' benefits. And of course, it's a source of resources and employment. So benefits are needed. But if benefits are too high, there will be a problem of rapid access, because the authorities will block the pricing. There will be a problem of availability for all, and a problem, as I said, of sustainability of healthcare systems. So my feeling is that the price should not be, as it is currently, I have to say, the highest price that a given market can tolerate. I think that the price should be based on what is called value-based pricing. So how do you define the value? It's health technology assessment. Health technology assessment is made by agencies in Europe, and these are not the same as a licensing agency. In Europe, the licensing agency is EMA. And there are, in many countries, health technology agencies which look at not the licensing, but reimbursement and pricing. And the job is not the same. For licensing, you just look at benefits-risk ratio. For reimbursement and pricing, you compare with existing therapies. So there are different ways of assessing the value. The first one is to look only at clinical benefits, clinical added value compared to existing agent. The second way is to use some form of health economic assessment. Clinical comparison, it's always comparative, but there are some questions. Which comparator, which type of comparison, randomized clinical trials or indirect comparison, which endpoint, as I said. So the clinical added value may be different across countries, which is a problem, of course. This is the example of a country who does only clinical assessment, Germany. In Germany, the initial price just after licensing is proposed by the company. And there is an assessment of the benefit by the German institution called IQWiG and the decision by the federal institution. So if there is a benefit compared to the existing drugs, the price can be higher than the control. If no benefit, there is a discussion. And the cost effectiveness assessment is very rare, and currently it doesn't exist. It's just based on clinical assessment. This is the rank criteria regarding mortality, adverse event, health quality of life. So they are very strict criteria linked to the hazard ratio, and this leads to a quantification of the benefit for the patient. Second possibility, health economic assessment. It's again comparative. You can compare the cost efficacy with overall survival, the cost utility with overall survival plus quality of life, and even the cost benefit, adding the social benefit of the treatment, which is very rarely done. For new drugs, it's based on models provided by the company and analyzed by independent economists. So it leads to definition of what is called incremental cost-effectiveness ratio. What is the incremental cost accepted for an incremental benefit? We have to evaluate the direct costs, including the side effect costs, for a defined temporal horizon, not only for 1 year, but for the life expectancy in a given disease. And it's usually in euro or pounds or dollars per QALY being quality adjusted life years. So there is a question of threshold. If you define an ICER, is there a threshold? And above the threshold, you shouldn't cover the drug. Actually, there is no consensus. In England, the threshold is 20 to 30,000 pounds per QALY. But many drugs are much more expensive, so they do accept exceptions, as we will see. In the Netherlands, it's 80,000. In other countries, it might be 3 times the GDP per capita, so 100,000 euro per QALY, for instance. But again, no consensus, and in some countries there is an implicit threshold which may vary from across the disease. It's also important to determine not only the ICER, the ratio cost effectiveness, but also the uncertainty of the model. And there is, for instance, this type of analysis which evaluates which parameter influence more the ICER, and one of the parameters which influence more the ICER is the cost of the drug. And also there is another evaluation which is called the acceptability curve, which is to define the probability of being cost effective. And in this example, in 98% of cases, the ICER would be less than 25,000 euro. But if the threshold is 35, the probability is lower, of course. I would like to give you an example for multiple myeloma. In multiple myeloma, 2 weeks ago, there was a publication by the ICER, the institution I defined. And they compared low-dose Dex and low-dose Dex plus 3 novel agents. According to the published study, Aspire for carfilzomib, Eloquent for elotuzumab, and Tourmaline for ixazomib. And what is important is to see that the clinical benefit is very significant. Here are the hazard ratio, and here are the progression-free survival gain. But when looking at the cost-effectiveness ratio, you have here the price of Lendex, the cost of Lendex, and the cost of this triple combination. You have here the overall survival gain compared to Lendex, approximately 1 year, and you have the quality survival with good quality of health. And when looking at the ratio cost-quality, the ICER, the incremental cost-effectiveness ratio, is very high. I told you 100,000. It's here 300 to 400. It's for second-line multiple myeloma, and the same is true for third line when you use this triple combination in third line. Here are the ratio from 300 to more than 400,000. So the conclusion of this study is that, of course, the clinical benefit of this reagent exists. It was considered incremental, or maybe better, because there is a moderate certainty of small net benefit. But the estimated budget of this reagent is very high, 400 million euro per year, and maybe 800 million euro per year at 5 years. So the conclusion by this, it's not mine, but by the institution, was that at current acquisition cost, the estimated ICER, cost-effectiveness ratio of this regimen, exceeds by far the commonly cited threshold. So what is the decision based on this ICER? In England, the decision is to use a threshold to decide coverage. It's a yes or no policy. If it's over the ratio, then you don't reimburse. Companies may agree to patient access scheme. There is also the cancer fund drug, but which is already over. And there are some exceptions, as I said, orphan disease, short life expectancy, where the ratio can be up to 50,000. But many cancer drugs are more than 100,000. In France, we have a parallel assessment of the health economic ratio and medical assessment by two different committees, and this is given to the pricing committee, which uses these two information to decide and to discuss with companies. So the difference between NICE, the product price is decided by the company, and if the ICER is over the threshold, no reimbursement. In France, it's different. The product price is proposed by the company, and then, given the ICER, the price is decided by the pricing committee after negotiation with the company. So different philosophy. I would like just to say a few words on European cooperation. This is a European network for HTA, Health Technology Assessment. Many countries participate. And the objective are to reduce overlap and duplication of effort and to increase the health technology input to decision-making in European member states, to also strengthen the link between health technology assessment and healthcare policy making. So we have done, and French HRS did participate to this effort, we have done a number of cooperation regarding early dialogues with the company for the best research and development, core HTA model, methodological guideline, the way to perform additional data collection after launch, and we recently look at the most important contribution, which is joint assessment report, like at EMA, two co-authors, reviewers, and the agency will accept or don't accept the joint assessment performed. I'd like to finish by giving you some ideas of other possible contributions. The payers, currently the payers make some drug-specific agreements. For instance, they can pay for performance. This is what we call conditional coverage or conditional pricing, which needs, of course, registry or post-encryption, post-launch studies to evaluate the efficacy in the real life and to be sure that the efficacy is the same as the published one in clinical trials. The other possibilities is discounts or rebates, and in France we do perform price-volume rebates. The company says we will treat X patient. If the number of patients is superior, they will have to rebate, to give the difference to the social security system. There are also negotiations, which is the case in Germany, in France, which may be based on the ICER, or your ICER is too high, so you should decrease your price. And we now know that there is an official price, a so-called facial price, but the real price might be much lower. Maybe new approaches. My opinion is that we should have different prices for different indications and different benefits, as I said. My opinion is that we should work on the price of combination. For instance, deliver a price not for a drug, but for clinical status, price of metastatic melanoma, price of treatment of multiple myeloma in third line. If you give one drug, it's the same price if you give 3 drugs. So if 3 drugs is better, you choose 3 drugs, but it's not more expensive. Of course, it's difficult. So currently, in many countries, there is a budget impact control. And for instance, in France, the parliament votes a ceiling. You shouldn't spend more than a given amount of money. And finally, of course, the physician's choice, and the patient, very important. I think that there are patients in the room. The patient advocacy should be aware of the cost of drug, should be aware of the health economic assessment, should be aware of cost-benefit ratio. And for instance, they should participate in health economy assessment, not just give you the cost effectiveness of autologous stem cell transplantation strategy, because I'm in favor of autologous transplantation, and sometimes physicians say, oh, it's too expensive. Well, cost effectiveness analyses are rare, but there is one here which shows that it is compared, it's a retrospective analysis, compared to chemotherapy. Of course, survival is better, the price is higher, but the ICER in 90% of cases is less than 65,000. It's expensive, but it's acceptable. And recently there was a study on early versus late. And you see here that early versus late, the cost is approximately the same, but early is better than late in terms of quality. And my final question is for physicians who design the trials. It's based on a very important question, which is maintenance therapy. There are 3 randomized trials showing that maintenance prolongs progression-free survival. In one study, the French one, and maybe the Italian one is not that clear, the survival is not significantly improved. So we know that you must give maintenance to improve progression-free survival. We're not sure for survival, overall survival. So the question, and I addressed this question more than 5 years ago, the question is which duration of treatment is necessary to have progression-free survival advantage? Is it continuous treatment until relapse? Is it fixed duration? Or is it until minimal residual disease? So I think that in the future we have to, and it's our responsibility, we have to look at this very important question. So the conclusion is that it's obviously a difficult and urgent question. In my opinion, It shouldn't be simply an indictment of pharma industry, which is currently the case in France with mediatic publication by some doctors. It should not lead to political rationing decisions because they are arbitrary. It should lead to cooperation of all stakeholders, industry, health technology assessment agency, payers, and as I said, physicians and patients. And it should be at the international level. I thank you for your attention.